Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to another episode of the Ummah Times. And today we are honored to have Brother Joram Van Klaveren in our virtual studio, hailing all the way from the Netherlands. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Joram,
Walaikum salam. Thank you
and
very much
welcome.
for the invitation.
Yeah, our pleasure. We'd like to welcome you to the show. And for our viewers, it is safe to assume that many in our Dawah circles already know about Brother Joram, who was a founder, who was a former anti-Muslim politician of an anti-Islam political party in the Netherlands. And while writing a book to bash Islam in 2017, he ended up embracing Islam later on and is now active in help spreading the message of Islam. Talk about a turn of events. Among the Dawah projects that we'll be discussing with Brother Joram today, he's also the author of his new book called Apostate, From Christianity to Islam in Times of Secularization and Terror, which we will also have the pleasure of talking about. Brother Joram, I know you had some events in Canada recently where we also had the pleasure of meeting. How did your trip overall go in Canada?
Yeah, it was very nice. It was very nice. It was a very beautiful community. Well, I've met you there, of course. Yeah. It was unbelievable, and you got a beautiful country over there. So and a big country when you compare to the Netherlands.
Yeah. I think Canada is considered the second largest country in the world. I think Russia
Yeah.
comes first. Yeah,
So
exactly.
I've noticed.
Yeah,
Big
exactly.
difference.
So we're not going to go too much into detail about the whole process of how you embraced Islam because like your stories are already out there and it's a very touching story. We want to get into the mind of a former politician because I know a politician by heart is an activist, right? And it's this is very inspiring that as a activist in your anti-Islam activities, when you embrace Islam, you still remain an activist. You just change your cap. Safe to say, right? So, what I want to kind of get into is like my first question for you is I know you've written this new book called Apostate. If you can, for the benefit of the viewers, if you can tell us a little bit about the book and what was the driving factor for writing this book?
Yeah. Well, I wrote the book because I wanted to explain what happened to me. Because of
Yeah.
course I was in a context, especially when it came to work, where everybody was very anti-Islam, of course, because the whole party existed because they said we want to fight Islam. That's kind of crazy, of course, when you look at it back from the perspective I have now. But well, when you look at the Netherlands, when you look at politics, all parties have their own sort of so to say core issue. We have a Green Party that it's all about environment. We have an Animal Party. It's quite unique in the Netherlands, but it's all about the animals. You have a liberal right wing party. It's about economy, etc., etc. And we had really a party what was only about fighting Islam, and it was the Freedom Party I was part of. But after I left, after I left, I thought to myself, well, I have this one big desire and was writing an anti-Islam book because I wanted to explain to the people why I thought that Islam was such a big problem in the West. And I thought it was a problem not only in the West, but the whole world. So I really saw it as the biggest danger for mankind. And while when you're in a party, of course, when you're in parliament, you don't have time to write a book. And if you do have the time, most of it's because you have a lot of co-writers with you. But I really wanted to write it from my own perspective, like why I thought it as a person that Islam was a danger. And I wrote it from a religious perspective as well, because I was brought up in a Protestant environment, Protestant tradition, but the party was secular. So I couldn't write it from a political perspective, but I really had to write it from my own personal perspective, and it was a Christian perspective. So, and because of course, when I was writing, it changed from this anti-Islam book into this personal search for God, ending up with me as a Muslim. But after I finished the book, I thought perhaps I don't publish it because that was a thought that crossed my mind. because of the setting. There were a lot of people very anti-Islam, my work, my old friends, etc., etc. So all of a sudden, when you say, "Well, I became Muslim," people said he became crazy. They said, "Well, perhaps some very wealthy sheikh gave me money to say this." The most ridiculous theories were out there. So I thought, well, perhaps it's just because I had a change of heart and mind. So I wanted to explain it. So I thought, well, I have to publish it because it felt almost like an obligation to explain what happened to me, because I know there were a lot of people, especially from my old party, that had the same mindset and they thought the same things when it came to all these issues that I treat in my book. And the funny thing is that I really didn't know what title to give the book, and I went to California right after I became Muslim, and I met Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, and he is this like a Zaytuna college, like a university kind of institute over there. And he said to me, "Well, if you call it Apostate, it will be, and you go to, for example, Pakistan, it will be a one-way trip for you." It was, of course, a joke. But I told him, well, I have to. I think apostate is a good title because I was an apostate from a Christian perspective, of course, but also in a political sense, and it was kind of a wink because the whole issue in the West when it comes to Muslims leaving the religions, about apostasy, and all these scary thoughts. So I thought, well, it will be an appropriate title to, and that's how I came up with the title Apostate. But it was in the core, it was about explaining myself. That's why I wrote the book.
And I think it was probably necessary, especially for you, because you had such a public profile in a Christian majority country, or primarily a secular country where the Muslims are a very tiny minority,
Oh.
and one of our own has left us in a way, like that's what might be going through their minds, right? And I guess you had no choice but to explain yourself, unless you like leave the country, right? So I think it kind of all made sense that it was something necessary. Like
It is,
really,
yeah. And it's what you say, because it's about 5% in the Netherlands is Muslim, so 95 isn't. And it's not like you said in the beginning it was a Christian country, and then you rephrase yourself that it's especially it's more like a secular country nowadays, because 51% is secular in the Netherlands, really secular atheists. So all Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, whatever, if you combine them, they're still a minority nowadays. So that's kind of strange. But yeah, I really had to explain also, because if I would go to a mosque and nobody would know I was a Muslim, perhaps the police would came and they thought perhaps I was going to do something strange, or maybe one of the visitors of the mosque would do something strange to me. So yeah, like you said, it was almost necessary to explain it. And also in a political sense, because of course, when you become Muslim, everybody says, well, you start over again, right? In a religious sense, you're like a baby. And but in a social political sense, it's of course not the same, because all the things I said and all the things I thought and wrote, they were still there. And especially when I look at my old party, sometimes they use some arguments I made up. So like to say, the poison is still there. So I had to explain it so I could fight it. Otherwise, it was impossible for me.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a good point you made that you also needed to explain yourself even for the Muslims in your country, right? As well,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know what? Before I go into my next question, I think Brother Ali, if you want to jump, I think you had some questions as well for Brother Joram.
Yeah, I just want to kind of switch the gear a little bit about, it's definitely linked to your book as well, Apostate. But in your view, I mean, also perhaps when you're writing the book and also, post-publishing, what are some of the critical challenges, from your perspective that you believe the Muslims are facing, not just in Netherlands, but, in Europe, generally speaking?
What the challenges are for the community?
Yes.
Well, I think it differs from country to country, because when you look at, for example, the UK, it's a very different context. compared to, for example, the Netherlands or Austria or Italy or whatever. So because Europe is so diverse, right? And yeah, of course you live in Canada. It's a big country, and in a way it's much more the same. When you go from province A to province B, of course there will be differences. You have this Quebec thing with the French and the English speaking people, but in a way you're all Canadian. But in Europe, of course, we all have a different language, different cultures, different histories. Most of the countries in one time in history had a fight, a war. So it's very diverse in a sense, and it can be positive, but sometimes it's harsh. So if you really want to compare it, it's kind of difficult, because in the UK, the Muslim community is much more professionalized when you compare it to the Netherlands, for example. And they have, in a way, different Muslims. Look at the history, because most of the first generation of Muslims that came to the Netherlands, where most of them were from a Moroccan or a Turkish background, they were selected on not having an education. So they had to do hard labor. But they weren't supposed to think or develop, etc., etc. Well, we take the strongest man, really the strongest man, to do the hard labor. So, of course, that's very difficult if you come in a society that is not so much about hard labor anymore, especially nowadays. So it's all about IT, it's about social services and stuff like that. So those persons and the way they were brought up in the homelands is so different from the context they were put in a way, and especially where their children were going to grow up and have their education and their whole life. So it really differs from country to country, because that's a big difference with the UK, for example, especially with the United States and perhaps also Canada. So I don't know the context over there, of course, but in Europe it's very different. But I think one of the challenges in general is, and it has to do with secularization, especially in Northwestern Europe. And I think you see it with the Qatar soccer, the World Championship soccer right now. You see it very explicitly that there are Northwestern European countries that are pushing their progressive liberal agenda in such a way that it's almost getting embarrassing for some people. Even people over here who are not religious, they say, well, you can just respect the country's laws, because for example, there was this American journalist, a CNN journalist, and he said, well, I didn't get any access to the stadium because of my rainbow shirt. He said that access was denied. And I did a little tweet, and I said, what do you think will happen if someone with a niqab tries to enter a stadium in France or Denmark? That person will be banned. It doesn't get any access to the stadium. So, and that's something they say that's okay. And the other way around, it's like almost the most terrible thing that can happen. So it's kind of hypocrite, and it's kind of strange in a way. So, and what I'm trying to say is that the whole secularization, that one of the results is that people don't understand religion and religious feelings anymore. So for the Muslims, there are still, most of the Muslims here in the Netherlands are still practicing Muslims. So the Mu'min, so to say. And most of the context is very atheistic, really, and very secular. So you have a lot of clashes, and it will intensify, I think, in the coming decades, because when you look at the statistics, secularization isn't here with the Muslims. Secularization is something, it's a progressive development with the rest of the country. So when it comes to asking some respect for your religion, or have, for example, different ideas about food, the dress, etc., that's something that will collide more and more and more. And that's something that in whole of Europe is becoming a thing because of secularization. So that the clashes will be, I think they will intensify, and perhaps they will even get a little bit worse.
No, I think it's interesting, because I just want to unpack a little bit of what you said earlier about the Kana immigration the migration that happened, especially, from the Muslim countries to the European continent. Because I've noticed, because I've traveled quite extensively in Europe as well, especially Belgium and Netherlands. So I have some family there as well, close to Amsterdam area, and in Belgium and Antwerpen. And I mean, I've noticed that, especially UK apart, to some extent, yes, UK, especially in the 60s and 70s, a lot of people from the Indian subcontinent came in as laborers as well. And now, obviously, they're there third, fourth generations. So the educational level has changed quite a bit, especially in the UK. But I've noticed that the Muslim population in Europe generally are much less educated. So my concern was basically, fine, they're much less educated. So that also translates to the fact that they don't really have an ability to really defend themselves from the secular onslaught, to understand these complex political concepts, right? Whereas, the Muslim migration population in America and Canada is much more educated and just much more nuanced, because that's just how the structure is of the migration. Because most of the educated people back home, like doctors, engineers, accountants, they come to these countries to find jobs, where Europe, it was purely labor-based.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I talked to, when I was in California, I talked to, was a guy from Morocco, and he lived in the United States. And he asked me about the context in the Netherlands, how it was with the Muslim community compared to the U.S., etc. So I explained to him what the social economical position was when it comes to education, when it comes to welfare, stuff like that. And then he said something was remarkable. He said, well, so your Muslim community is like our Mexicans.
Yes.
And I thought, yeah, that's a good comparison, because when you look at the US and perhaps Canada as well, most of the Muslims are a little more educated, have a little bit more money than average. And when you compare it to the Muslim community here, it's just the other way around. So that makes it, like you said, it's very hard for people if you don't have institutions and you don't have professional people organized to defend yourself or to claim your rights, because that's a big problem.
Yeah, because I mean, that's the kind of segues to my next question about the assimilation, right? So I think it's just a lot easier for these Muslims to kind of like, assimilate versus integrate into the European society. But at the same time, my question to you was, at what cost, right? Like, are they really, losing their religion? In the core aspects of it, because they just don't understand better, right? Just to basically, get a little bit more welfare, to have, better access to healthcare system, to send more, euros to their families back home, because they're much poorer. They are willing to basically not have any push or resistance, to the secular onslaught, and just, let things be, because at the end of the day, they're not really, consider themselves part of the society per se, right? They're just there to basically, make some money and send it back home and build homes back home, right?
Yeah, I think that was the case, but that changed, I think. When you look at the third generation, everybody understands now that they live here in the Netherlands. They will die here probably. They will have their children here. The children are at school. You're going to work, etc. So your whole life is here in this secular, liberal context. So you have to do something. And when you look at the levels of education, that went up very quick. So I think in that sense, I think we can be positive and hopeful for the future. But in the meantime, there is a big problem, because it's so that's why I mentioned Qatar. You see, it's for 30 days. It's aimed at Qatar. But in the Netherlands and in Belgium and Denmark and France and whatever, it's 365 days aimed at the Muslim community. So that will have an impact, of course. And the Netherlands is kind of strange when you compare to other countries as well, because we don't really have an organized lobby organization here. So there is no real lobby here, like CARE, for example, in the United States. And you have the British Muslim Council in the UK, and we don't have something here in the Netherlands. There is something but it was founded by the government itself, because they wanted to talk to the Muslims, but the organization that's supposed to do this lobby work for the Muslim community is very passive. So they don't do anything. And it's because they were founded by the Dutch government themselves. So there's nothing from the community itself. And of course, if it's not from yourself, it isn't real in a way, because nobody feels represented by this organization. So that's yeah, it is really a problem. And I think, but on the long run, perhaps it can change, but it depends on how things will develop when it comes to the secularization, because we have this research done every 10 years. It's called God in the Netherlands. And they started researching in 1966. So every 10 years, they say, well, this is how people in the Netherlands look at religion. This is what they believe. These are the groups, etc. And 2 years ago, it was the last research done. Yeah, no, it's longer. 2016 was the last research done, and it said for the first time, it said the Netherlands is not a Christian country anymore. Christianity is marginalized, and we are an atheistic country. And what was very remarkable that they said there were two groups. One is the Orthodox Protestant group and the Muslims. They said those are the only two groups left in a way, and they don't really secularize. So that's because you ask, hey, how is this secularization? There is no real secularization with them, but because they are so small, both of them are 5-6%. And of course, you're in a context where the overwhelming majority isn't what you are, and they almost are fighting you in a way. It's not in a literal sense, but when you look at laws, when you look at the whole dominant culture, it's so in your face, and it's all the time. You're not part of this world in a way, and this society, and that, of course, it affects very much the children. So that's something.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, it's definitely an uphill battle, right? Because all the time, this constant onslaught, as you said, secularism, the dominant cultures in your face, especially, our upcoming generation. So, we really have to be on our guard literally 24/7, and we really need to equip ourselves intellectually to really tackle these ideologies, right? But, it is an uphill battle. You're in constant mode of battle. There's essentially, no. My question is that you think this can exhaust the Muslim community at some point in time, because for how long, as normal people like you and myself, right, we have jobs, we have family to feed, right? And to be really active, to survive in this chaos, you have to be really active, right? And you really have to be an activist, as Brother Zishan mentioned before, but not everybody has that ability, right? Do you foresee, maybe, in 10 years, 20 years, we're gonna experience some sort of an exhaustion, and then, at the same time, just completely lay down our weapons and just, just like the Jews and the other progressive Christians, just, assimilate completely?
Well, inshallah, that will never happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
But well, I don't know, because until now, most of the children, even when they're, so to say, under attack, they still really feel Muslim. So that's a good thing. And I have this project founded with some other brothers and sisters called Islamic Experience Center. And we go to schools. So we see a lot of schools. We've been to over 150 schools already. And that's primary schools, high schools, universities, etc. So we really see the differences in parts of the country, but also the groups. And we see, of course, a lot of Muslim students and students and children as well. And they are under attack. And sometimes you see children saying things that you say, well, that's not really the things you should say. But yeah, it is a big challenge, like you said. But we have to organize. That's the most important thing. We have to organize. We have to found institutions when it comes to media, when it comes to politics, when it comes to education. And in the Netherlands, for example, you only have two Islamic high schools, and let's say around 55, 60 primary schools. And that's it. But when you compare it to, let's say, the Protestant denomination or the Catholic denomination, and of course that's logical because this used to be a Christian country, there are over 1,000. So you're so not organized compared to them. And also public schools. And we have this system that, and it's kind of funny because we are a very secularized state, but at the same time, the infrastructure is very Christian. So the majority of schools are Christian schools in the Netherlands. It's over 60%. So that's kind of strange because we have, let's say, 15% really practicing Christians, maybe 20 that go to church, etc., etc. But the whole system, even in politics, we have 3 Christian organizations in the parliament. We have 3 or 4 Christian broadcasting organizations in the Netherlands, state television as well. So, but it's like a facade in a way because there are no Christians there. It's like you see, looking at the church, you walk in and you see all those secular people, and the Muslim community has one little broadcasting organization, but it's commercial, and it's really small compared to the rest. And there is no real university. We have 2 high schools, and that's it. But that's not something you can build your community on, and it's not something that's not enough to defend yourself. If this is your army, not in a literal sense, of course, so that nobody starts panicking, etc. But if this is your army, then you're not really well equipped.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, the similar cases in Canada, like because Canada is more or less a secular country as well, but you got so many Catholic schools because every school board every school board has a Catholic school board almost, right? So, but again, it's a facade because no one really cares about the Trinity or the any kind of religious idea. Again, mostly are operating either they're deists or they're operating on that secular mode, right? So I think it's an important point you mentioned that like especially we need to organize. But especially in a country like we are in Canada or the Netherlands, where we are a minority, not only we have to organize, but we have to also put our Dawah efforts on the forefront, where we can also find, especially influentials in society like yourselves, look into Islam and embrace Islam. Because I think, and this is how human psychology works. If you have more influentials likening to Islam and being positive about Islam in a public way and embracing, a lot of them are also, if they're embracing Islam, that's going to make an impact to society, and that's going to push society to look into Islam at least, and maybe inshallah, hopefully more people embracing Islam as a solution and cure to all the ills of the human being and the human society, right? So that kind of leads me into my next question. I know you are in terms of the Dawah efforts, you've come up with this new VR technology in kind of propagating Islam. If you can tell us a little bit about that project and how that got started.
Yeah, well, that is what I mentioned, the IXC, the Islamic Experience Center. So when we go to schools, with we call it the guest lesson of Islam. So what we do, we have this VR device. Well, these are the devices we use. IXC. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, you can see it.
Yeah.
But what we do is that we go into schools. Then of course we just introduce ourselves, tell a little bit what we are, what we do, and what we do. The main purpose is that we want to take away misconceptions about Islam, and at the same time we just want to inform people about Islam, of course. And when we started, it was particularly focused on non-Muslims. But while operating, we noticed that a lot of Muslim children, they needed, so to say, an iman boost. Mm-hmm. So nowadays we go to Islamic schools as well, and it's a lot of fun, of course. And most of the things they hear in the video, of course, they know. But sometimes they hear something new, and it's more about the discussion and to take a little pride in the fact that you are a Muslim, that you have Islam as your religion, etc. But normally when we start, we call it the association round. So we ask the children and the students, what is the first thing that comes up in your mind when you hear the word Muslim or Islam? And there is no good or bad, just be honest. So sometimes you hear terrorism, blood, beheadings, etc. Sometimes you just hear, I don't know, it's something with a religion. I know you have Allah and Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, Quran. So it's a whole range of things they start talking about them. We notice them, we write them on the board. after we looked at the video, we get back to what they said. And in the video itself, it's like, we call it a trip through the history of Islam. So you're in your home in VR, you're sitting in your living room, you're watching television, and you see all these horrible things happen. So you see 9/11, you see explosions, you hear people, the talking heads on television talking about Muslim, Islam in a very negative way. And all of a sudden, someone knocks at your door, then the door opens, and then the image starts getting a little blurry, and all of a sudden you're in the year 850 in Baghdad, in Iraq, in the House of Wisdom. And then there's this old man. He says, well, Assalamu alaikum, we were expecting you already. And he starts explaining to you, well, this is something else. This is what we call the beginning of the golden age of Islam. And he starts explaining, what is Islam? Where does Islam exist? In what countries has it been part of? What is the Quran? He tells you a little bit about the Qibla, the Prophet, etc. So then the image starts getting blurry again, and then you're in Mecca. So you see the Kaaba in the distance, but you're not really in the Mecca of nowadays with the McDonald's and the golden cars and stuff like that, but old school Mecca. So a lot of sand, you see some palm trees, a market, and like I said, the Kaaba. And in the distance, there's Bilal. And the old man, that is your guide, he walks with you in the desert, and he starts explaining a little bit more. And he says, well, let us listen to this man, Bilal. He first was a slave. He gives you some examples of what he did and who he was, etc. And then you hear Bilal talking. You don't really see him because it's in the distance, but you see some Sahaba in the distance while they were listening to what he is saying. And then he gives you an ayat from the Quran. After that, from a certain surah, after that it becomes blurry again, the image, and then it's night, and then you are in the desert, and you see a very big moon, and you see all these stars, and this man says, well, it's not only about history and religion, but it's also about culture and technology and etc. And he starts giving you some examples of inventions that are still very relevant for us today. So Ibn Firnas, of course, with the first person who tried to fly. He talks about the camera. He talks about coffee, hospitals, universities, and a lot of other things. And you see these things as holograms in the air, in the sky. So plop, they just come up. And after that, you hear the azan in the distance. And after the azan, you wake up in your chair again in your living room. So like it was a dream. And then the video stops. And then we say, okay, it's so different from what you in the beginning said, let's say terrorism, when you compare to what you've seen in the video. How is that possible? And then we start talking, they start thinking, etc., etc. So that's in a nutshell what we do.
Yeah. So when you were visiting here in Canada, I had the pleasure of actually experiencing it, parts of it of the beginning, and it was very impressive. So it's amazing work you and your team are doing with that.
I think we're not doing it alone, of course. And
Yeah.
I think it's very. I think the good thing is that we ask an organization to check whether it's effective or not.
Mhm.
Are people really starting to think differently when it comes to Islam? And almost 75% of the participants changed their way of thinking. They said, well, we really didn't know this, or this is new for me. I didn't know. And it was funny. There was this one child that said, well, there's a little, was a guy, he's called Murad. It was a guy from a primary school. And his neighbor was a little girl, Linda was her name. She said, well, I still don't like Murad because he took my ball, but I think Islam is something beautiful. I didn't know about it. So that's a funny thing. It's just like an example of how really young children perceive what they've seen. And of course we try to plant a seed, so to say, for in the future. They don't know if the only thing you hear is always negative, they will always have this first association with there was something fun, there was something beautiful. I don't know what it was, and that perhaps is this.
Yeah.
We'll see.
And for anyone who wants to kind of support your project, they can always go to the Islamic Experience website, and you're also accepting support and all that, right? Be it.
Yeah, you can go to the website, www.islamexperience.com, and if people want to support us, they can do a donation or something else. Or, it doesn't matter. If people want to support us, it's just in a way a voluntary Dawah project. But yeah, alhamdulillah, it's very effective, and we get entrance to a lot of schools, so that's a really positive thing. And we've always tried to reach out. So there's this organization, it's called Voice of Islam. And that's an organization in New Zealand, so the other side of the world, especially for you guys, the other side of the world. And they do the same thing right now. And we go to schools, but they bought a really big bus, a van, and they made a classroom inside the van. And they go to events, to musical events, etc., or music events. And when they are there, they say, well, of course you can go to your event, but perhaps before or after you go, check this out. So they do dawah, especially in the in the places where a lot of people don't expect it. So that's really beautiful as well.
Yeah, and I guess your team is already kind of working on this as well as a long-term project where you can have branches of what you're doing in other countries, where they're doing, and then they're doing something similar, how you're going to schools, both Muslims and to both Islamic schools and the normal government schools. That would be actually pretty, that could spread like wildfire. Yeah, so.
Yeah,
There's so much potential with that project you've started. So
and it's fun because a lot of it's just funny just to be in a VR environment, right?
yeah,
and
exactly.
most of the children, they already know VR by playing games and stuff. But when I ask them, did you ever do it in an educational sense? They said, no, it's something new. I don't know. And they check it out and say, well, that's fun. Something nice.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that this specific Dawah project has been keeping you really busy. But I'm just out of curiosity, are there any other Dawah projects you're working on or looking at down the line would like to get started on? Out of curiosity.
Well, the IXC project, of course, is what we call a mobile service. But now in about 2-3 months, we're starting a museum as well. The first Islamic museum in the Netherlands, because there is no Muslim museum, there's no Islamic museum. There have been, when you go to, for example, we call it Rijksmuseum. It's the museum of the empire. That's when you translate it literally. It's a state museum, of course. And once in a while, they have something about Islam, but it's not a real Islamic museum. So, and it's kind of strange because there have been Muslims for over 70 years in the Netherlands now. So we thought, well, it's time for a museum as well. And we bought some property, and they're building it right now. But the thing is that it won't be like an ordinary museum when you have an old book with some dust. But what we do now is that we have it all in virtual reality, augmented reality, and hologram. So when you enter, really, it's like a physical place. You enter it, and there are all these holograms. You have augmented reality. Everybody gets a pair of glasses, and you can go to check things out. And everything is in AR, VR, and hologram. So you can, if, for example, we bought some stuff from the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul. For example, a piece of clothing of the daughter of the Prophet. Peace and blessings be upon him. And we put it into this 3D concept. And I'm not an IT guy, so I don't know really how it works. But when you put on the glasses, you can really touch it and change it and turn it around. So that's much more fun, of course, than just looking through a glass to something old. So now it's getting much more live. And then they have a headset, so someone tells you in, let's say, 2 minutes, what are you seeing? Why is it something important? And we did it for smaller children, for adults as well. So it's fun for everybody. So it's like something that the Muslim families can do without worrying about seeing naked people or being confronted with all the crazy stuff of these days.
It's interesting because I think I had an opportunity to go to Umrah a couple of months ago, and then Medina, they have the same concept as well, but it's not complete virtual reality. So they have a museum right across the Prophet's Mosque. I'm not sure if you were there or not. So it's basically all virtual as well. So they have screen. They don't have holograms though, but they basically have the basic knowledge about Islam. You go in, you pay like 10 euros tickets, and they show you, a few things, and then they take you to a small little theater, about 10, 12 people capacity, and they will make you watch like, a 3D couple of minutes movie. And it's not, it's not done, even though it's brand new. I think it just opened a few months ago, but it's not done to the level where it should be, especially if you have oil money. They could have done much better, I think, right? It's still very, very amateur, but it's they're doing similar kind of thing there as well. Yeah.
Nice, really nice. Yeah, and I think it's really important, because what I've noticed is that some youngsters, when they talk about Islam, and I'm talking about Muslim youngsters, they sometimes have the feeling that it's not something it's not something that they associate with fun or with beauty or with positive things. So it's almost if they are scared, that they're scared of their own religion in a way.
Yeah.
And I of course I'm new, so I don't know everything. Most of the things I don't know, but I always try to explain them that it's like you have a diamond, and you have to do something with it. You can put it in a closet and never look at it again, but that's not the purpose of a diamond. The purpose of a diamond is to show to people, or to wear it, to do something with it. So, and if you're a Muslim, wear your Islam. So and they always say, yeah, what do I have to do then? And then they have questions, and most of the time I have to say, well, you have to ask someone else, because I don't know it. But I'd say you have to take some pride in it. If you read a little bit more, or just investigate, or see some movies, or do VR or whatever, that you see what a beautiful history we have, and what a beautiful and really inspiring people in this tradition. Of course, you have the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, but also Umar and so many more, Sumaya, and all these persons, all these people that did so much for Islam. And most of them, they really don't know them even. When we talk to them, they who was Umar, who was Sumaya? And yeah, well, I think that's in a way it's kind of sad, because it's like you have a treasure and you don't treasure your treasure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. I know we've gone a little over time, but I have one last question from my end, at least, for you. Is I know you were very immersed in the political atmosphere in the Netherlands, and in the political movement, how active you were in Parliament and your political party. I'm just out of curiosity, are you still in touch with any of your politician colleagues? You don't have to name any names, but I'm just curious if you're in talks privately or publicly, where at least you've ignited some sort of curiosity, where they've also changed their views, not to the extent where they actually embraced Islam, but cleared up misconceptions that they may have had. If you want to just kind of comment on that.
Well, I'm still in contact with a lot of old colleagues, not always from my old party, of course, because in the beginning, it's something you said, was that I betrayed them, right?
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that was kind of shocking to me, and perhaps it was naive, even after 12 years of being anti-Muslim politician. But the people that were really angry with me when I became Muslim, in the beginning, they called me a race traitor. They said, yeah, you're a race traitor. So I thought, what do you mean with a race traitor? They said, well, you're a white man and from Europe. You cannot be a Muslim. And I told them, well, Islam is not about your skin color. They said, well, all Muslims are black. And I told them, well, most of the Muslims are Asian. They're from Indonesia, but that's another thing. But I told them, well, when you look at Albania, for example, or Bosnia, they're both European countries with white people, and the majority is Muslim. So it doesn't make any sense to say that there are no white Muslims. And of course, there are a lot of other people in the world. But that was something that was really shocking in a way, because it wasn't so much about your ideas, but it was really ethnicity. And yeah, that's still kind of strange because, of course, there is a lot of racism, and I know about racism, of course, as well, because the old party was racist in a way as well. But it was not so much about the skin color; it was really about Islam. And in the end, and that was one of the reasons I left. It became much more about ethnicity. They were only talking about Moroccan people, Moroccan this, etc. And during one rally, the party leader, Geert Wilders, the guy with the blonde hair, he asked the crowd during this rally, do you want more or less Moroccans in the Netherlands? And everybody starts shouting less, 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 less. And he said, well, I'll make that happen for you. And that was the point for me that I said to him, well, okay, I don't like Islam and I don't have anything in common with most Muslims, but it wasn't so much about ethnicity, because what a lot of people don't know is that inside the Freedom Party, there were also people with a Turkish background and Moroccan people. And of course, they were secular, very secular, or they had another religion. They weren't Muslims, of course, but they were still ethnically also Moroccan or Turkish or whatever. So I told the Geert Wilders, it's kind of betrayal to say that you want to get rid of all Moroccans while they are fighting our fight with us. And they said, well, that's collateral damage. And I thought, well, that's kind of crazy to say. So that was how our discussion started. And that's one of the reasons I left, the main reason I left, because I thought, well, I'm very anti-Islam, but it's not so much about the people. It's really about the ideology that I thought that's a big danger and a big threat to us. So yeah, that was a problem, but I'm still in contact with some of the people. But like I said, the people who called me a race trader, they don't want to see me anymore because I'm a race trader. But colleagues from other organizations, other political parties I talk to, and there is one person in the Freedom Party. So, and I mentioned this one time earlier. I think he will be a Muslim, inshallah, because he really had a change of heart. But he said, well, I can never go public. And it was funny because Abdul Hakim Murad, Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad from England, he wrote a book. It's called Traveling Home. It's a very interesting book, his latest book. And in this book, he mentioned there is this group of people, and he mentions, and he calls them submarines. And submarines are people who converted to Islam, but they stay below the surface because of the context they're in. It's impossible for them to speak out in a way. So they are Muslim, they're praying, they're doing all the things they should do, but nobody knows. So, and there's this one person I know in the Freedom Party who is like, I would call him a submarine or a coming submarine. And you don't know if there are other people, but it's when you are in this party, it's like a sect. It's really a sect, because it's like we against the world. And if you talk to a journalist, for example, they already say, okay, you're out. And I've seen people kicked out because of just one talk with a journalist. So it's really a sect. So you're in it, you're with us, or you're against us. That's it. Yeah. And so that makes it a big problem to talk to some people. And sometimes it's very funny. There's this one guy who's in parliament. He lives near my house, and we go to the same supermarket. And it's not allowed. He's not allowed to be seen with me. Because and sometimes when I see him, I walk to it, I say, let's make a photo. No, nobody can see us. So yeah, so there is still contact, but it's
I think it's fair to say that we need to equip these submarines with the nukes.
It will be good.
Yeah, but you know what? But there was one other because when the news broke out that you had embraced Islam, being part of this anti-Islam party, they also reported another person from that party who had embraced Islam as well. You know, so that person you're not in touch with anymore, right? Anyways, I forgot his name.
Yeah, Arnoud van Doren. I think you mean him. No, he left the country.
Okay, he left the country.
No, really, he lives in Morocco now. So I don't see him that often. No, he was.
So he left the trenches. Basically, he left the trenches.
He's in HQ now.
No, may Allah empower you in the trenches, and may Allah find barakah in the great work you're doing there as well. And again, this was a pleasurable conversation we had with you. And again, thank you for your time. Brother Ali, you have anything else you want to?
No, Jazakallah khair again, Brother Joram, for your time. We really appreciate it. And may Allah put blessing in all the projects you're doing.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you back on the show sometime later or sometime in the future to give us updates as to what's going on. So that'd be great.
Yeah, well, thank you guys again for having me on the show, and may Allah bless you and all the work you do with the Ummah Times. Thanks, and inshallah we'll talk to each other in the future.
Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair for everyone for listening. Assalamu alaikum.